And now, everyone, let's put our hands together and give a warm welcome to our guests, Margaret Haag and Michael La-Plante.
Okay, so in the interest of full transparency, we did not plan anything. So I kind of wanted this to be about you, because I'm sure there's a lot of questions, right? That you're like, what's gonna go on when we get out there? How am I gonna do this? Is real life like school kind of thing, So I can, if you're interested, I have the ability to share stuff or show you what I do. And then also, I thought it was important to have Mike here because I'm basically all of the front, I'm figuring out the architecture, how a user goes from point A to point B, how to solidify an entire experience from front to end. And then there's this guy who comes in and so nothing happens without it getting built, right? So I could make all the pretty pictures all day, but there's got to be someone behind it, who puts that thing out into the world and knows how to deploy that. So I thought it would be really good to have him along here with me. So, what are you interested in? Nothing? Cool.
I don't know. Why don't you tell us about a normal flow for your day? How do you design out a process?
Yeah, okay. I could probably show you something that's really not interesting. Is this Yep.
There you go.
Okay. So, oops.
So there's the first thing. There's a bunch of
100
tabs.
million tabs open all the time, and everyone makes fun of me. Okay, so this is so we switched to Google Docs recently. So I switched projects. I used to work on CreditWise, and now I'm working on an internal tool for Capital One. So it's basically building an entire experience for data analysts. And it's not very, it's as boring as it sounds, I guess, right? Well, it's about data, and I'm I don't know anything about that. So I'm trying to learn it and understand it while trying to design for it. So basically, every credit card company has a proprietary risk model so if I'm going in and I'm applying for a credit card, they have all the information about me. So they're gonna assume, because of this model that they have, they're gonna make assumptions about me, whether or not they can trust me as a person who comes in. And so that's the reason if you get approved or denied for a credit card. So apparently right now, all the data analysts spend a lot of their time looking for the data. So what we're doing is gonna streamline that and have one central place where everyone can go and find all of this stuff. To build these machine learning models, to make risk decisions. It's really crazy. Okay. It's weird. I never
cool.
thought I would graduate here and be I work for a bank and let's talk about financial business things. It's really, really awkward for me. So, shoot. So you saw that little document that I had. So right here, all of these are all filtering options, right? So it's I basically take all of these Excel sheets and all these requirements, and then I have to make them pretty or make them functional. So you essentially turn this into this. And I've been dedicated to the search and discover part, which is, if you think about search, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You go to Google and you're how's Google doing it? They're pretty badass at search engines, They're I don't know, you don't say you're oh, why don't you Google that? It's become an adjective. It's a thing that you do now. So I took a lot of inspiration from them. So when I worked on CreditWise specifically, problems come in from everywhere. So everything comes in as a problem. And it will either come from a user. So people could submit app reviews, because people love to tell you what's wrong with your experience. So it'll either come from the users or people say I want this thing, why don't you have this thing? Which is a lot of stuff that comes from Facebook as well. Or Instagram, anything like that. Anything users are asking for, we have an open ear to that. And then there's also the side of the business, they could have a problem that they come in and they say, we have this problem and we need to fix it. And one of those for me, before I left CreditWise, was we need to make money. And I was like, okay. So I got to work on the, well, it's expensive, right? Like, think about it. We have like a couple designers, a bunch of product managers, like a VP of CreditWise, and then 3 dev teams, because you need one for Android, one for iOS, and one for responsive web. Right now, as it lives anyway. And like, imagine all the salaries of those people, right? And then all those people coming into work every day, that thing. And that costs a lot of money. That costs the company a lot of money. If you're not making money, you're just literally bleeding it. So I got to work on credit card offers within CreditWise. And the woman came up to me and was like, or the woman I was working with, and she said, okay, like, we have to do this credit card offer thing, and we only have 2 weeks because our dev team has 1 sprint. And the sprint is like, have you heard of Agile, working in Agile? So the sprint will be like how they work, and they're going to go in and have like a level of effort, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, so she comes to me, we have 2 weeks, and I was like, okay. So there's like 2 things that happen, right? It either fails or it succeeds. And I feel like in that moment, you can't think about that. You're just like, all right, what can I do? How fast can I get from point A to point B, and what I want to do? And so I started thinking about experiences that actually had really good content, that sold like really good advertised content. And I knew from working at USA Today what didn't work, like nobody pays attention to right rails. Advertisements are really annoying. But who does it really well? That's Instagram, like their advertising content looks like actual, like your friend feed, and it's caught me like several times where I'm like, that's a thing.
Buy this now.
Yeah, I know. So I was like, okay, and so I had the opportunity to set all of the illustration style for CreditWise. So I was like, I'm going to put a little bit of that into this credit card offer. So we did that, and it launched. And actually, I said we had this little statistic where it was the average user comes in for 40 seconds, and that's crazy, right? Like, they're just they open it, they're in there for 40 seconds, and they're out. And I was like, that's a huge, like, because we have that metric and we understand that people aren't spending a lot of time in here, like, what does that mean? That means they're only coming in, checking their credit score, and they're leaving. And so if this is going to be successful, if this test of offers will be successful, it should be on the front, the front page, as soon as you open the app. And it can't be abrasive. It's just got to be like, hi, I'm here, I'm a credit card offer, in like a friendly way. So we did that, and then everyone told me that that's not what they wanted. And I was like, it's fine, it's a test, And if the test fails, like, it's gone. We don't have to worry about it anymore. So if you're interested, I ended up making the company like millions of dollars, like, off of this thing, which is insane, I think I actually like cried about it one day, I was like, oh my God, I made the money.
So when you were doing that, is it you always hear the Chuck designs over the wall experience. Mm-hmm. Were you actively working during the sprint? I assume your sprints are 2-week periods probably?
Yeah.
So during that 2-week period, were you working closely with the development team that you had, or was it, hey, I rushed to build out this design and then here you guys are, just go build it? Or did they come back to you with questions and say, hey, I need to, I have a question about how we're going to lay out these offers on the homepage. Can you help us? What was that like?
Yeah. So I usually work with them, and I'm like, can we do this? If it's something crazy, I'm always like, can we do this? How are we going to do this? Blah, blah, blah. So we have to work with them to figure out how that's going to go, like where they're going to build it. And you have to document all that stuff and let them know. It's going to go from this page to this page, and then from this page to this page. And also, we use this thing called Zeppelin.
Okay.
Use it?
Yeah.
So Zeppelin's like a third-party tool, and you take your designs from like, do you guys use Adobe XD? Yeah? Sketch, maybe? No?
Probably
Okay.
Photoshop.
Ew.
Photoshop? Yeah. I still see people using Photoshop. What's the other one? Figma?
Don't do that. So it's like XD. Sketch is like XD. So when you export from Sketch into Zeppelin, it goes into, I'll show you, actually. It'll probably be easier that way. Shit. I don't have the internet, so I don't think I will be able to show you. So it goes in that tool. So I would like essentially go to this artboard and I would export it, and then it goes to this thing called Zeppelin. And then him as a developer gets to go and like when he clicks on this, he'll see the entire page. He'll see all the spacing, all the padding, all the sizes, like all the typography, all that stuff will be laid out for him. So it like streamlines the process. This is back in the day, we always used to have to sit there and make style guides.
Yeah, I know back in the day, I would get a design and I wouldn't even get a style guide, and it'd be a guessing game that between every object on the page, every component, I need to, give 10 items of padding or margin in between everything. So nowadays, when you get Zeppelin, it's kind of, all it does is it takes all the settings that you have in whatever design tool you're using and kind of compress that into a language that the development team then understands, and I can take that, and it streamlined my experience, something that took me, 2 hours to do, now takes me 30 minutes to do.
Yeah.
And it just makes things a heck of a lot easier, and the flow can go a lot quicker between the interaction between Margaret and I. When we run into an issue, it'd be like a day cycle to say, hey, can I get you to make a change to this design flow? Now with the new workflow from XD to Zeppelin and straight up, that interaction can change in, an hour, 30 minutes, and then you're back up to standards and moving quickly. No internet still?
Ooh.
Oh. It's a 0.
All right, let's try this. Thanks, voice from afar.
It's a 0, no problem.
Carry on. Don't mind me.
Oh. So that's one of the things that I absolutely love about that tool, and it's made my life a heck of a lot easier because there's never a question from a style guide perspective. We always get these style guides on the development team, and the design team usually is then on to the next thing that they're building, and we have questions that say, hey, how big do we want our header fonts to be? Or sometimes designers like to make the assumption that we'll know what they mean by their design, and when they give it to us, we have no clue what type of interaction they may have wanted. So in a mobile app, if they wanted something to bounce, or in like a responsive web, if they wanted something to hover or have a special effect or do something fancy, that's not stuff you can particularly always convey right from a flat design, whereas using the tools like Zeppelin, you can kind of convey that and get it through and say, hey, this is what I was expecting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even in like using my skills like I learned in going through DAD, like learning all the animation stuff, that helps now because like there's interaction and animation like in transition, so it's not like I talk about this thing how like I was at the first Hall of Fame ever, and I was in here actually, I think I sat over there and I watched Jason Whitmore give a talk, and I was like, man, I want to be Jason Whitmore someday. And I learned what it was like to animate 30 seconds, and I was like, I don't want to be Jason Whitmore. That's not my shtick, But learning those skills of like animation and transition and like keyframes and all that stuff helps you actually in stuff like this, like all those like they call them surprise and delights. If anything in an app ever makes you like, okay. So sorry, I'm a bit of scatterbrained, but do you guys use Yelp? Okay. Have you ever pulled Yelp down, like on the page? Have you ever pulled it?
I don't use
What? Okay, if you have
thing.
Yelp on your phone, you should get it out. So you start pulling your phone, and I think it's a little teddy bear or something weird. He goes in a rocket, and then when you let go, the rocket shoots out.
Oh.
It's freaking awesome.
And that's a good surprise
Yeah,
and delight, right?
it is.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, unless you find stuff like that. Like that's, did you find it? Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool.
So I would ask this: have you ever given a design to your team at Capital One with an assumption you would assume they know what you mean, and then they design it out and you see it, maybe even not till it's in production, and you go, what the heck are they thinking when that happened?
That happens all the time.
All the time?
Not all the time, but sometimes.
They don't ever come back and talk to you?
Yeah. I mean, there's been a few instances where it's like, I guess I'll admit the frustration where it's like, we have a tool like Zeppelin, and you're in there and you're seeing all of the type styles and the spacing and the padding and blah, 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 and you just literally put this out there and it doesn't look like what I made, you know?
And this highlights a good point between designers and developers.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily always see eye to eye. So designers have obviously tight deadlines that you have to meet, and then the development team also follows sprints, and they have tight deadlines that they have to meet. And usually where the corners get cut when it goes to development time is on those spacing things, or font being the right size, or maybe this picture just gets cut completely and never makes it to production. I know I've had experiences like that at previous jobs, so I'm sure you have plenty of those experiences too. And it's important to highlight that not everything is always rosy and sunshines.
Yeah. And iOS has this really weird thing where, like, what is it, the leading, right? Space between sentences.
Yeah.
Where it's apparently a huge pain in the butt to customize, which drives me insane because all of our text is like really tight, and I'm like, oh, readability, fix it. What's the most annoying thing a designer can do for you, or do to you?
Come up with some crazy. The thing I love is changing form elements and just doing something crazy in a form element that I'm of the mindset a form element is a form element. If we want it to look the same across, let's say, all the web browsers, just leave it standard and you'll get that experience. And then I've had some experiences where they've designed, and admittingly, it looks fantastic. It looks beautiful. But it's a pain in the behind to implement and get everything right across all the browsers. And or anyone who's ever done development work knows if you work with a designer and you push the design that they gave you into code and it doesn't look exactly like they gave you and that makes it to production, you're getting a message or an email that says, hey, why doesn't this look right? I mean, I gave you everything you needed. And sometimes it's not even the case. Sometimes designers and developers don't necessarily even have the same eye for things. Obviously, you have a much better eye towards design than I would. So there are just certain things, maybe even, rounding corners on boxes or something that I may just completely miss because I'm in the midst of my flow. And then by the time it hits, production or staging, whatever environment we're in, you say, hey, why'd you miss something so simple, silly? And there's plenty of times where I see that happen too.
Yeah, you're stupid.
Well, I mean, that's a super edge case, but usually I get, when I'm getting, I like to call them screens from our designers. When I get a set of screens, it's not one flow. So it's not a search flow from, we'll use your search flow you showed us earlier, from entering information to showing a results page. I'm getting entering information to results page to filtering the results page all the way through. So it's about 150 screens that I now have to condense. And the thing that drives me absolutely crazy when that happens is when it's never just one designer or one team. There's like 3 teams that work on it. So each team has a different set of standards that they use. So you never know which one to actually use because they don't follow a style guide.
Interesting.
And then you get into what I like to call the wild, wild west of designers and developers fighting.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting.
How was it working on, so you worked on CreditWise, right? And that's a free app. So obviously you were trying to figure out how to monetize it. But because you were on like the original team that made that, right? So how was that experience working with them and working on, because I think CreditWise was one of the first to do like a mobile credit score in an app, right? Close to it?
Credit Karma had theirs.
Credit Karma. So how was that, like working with the development team for like the first time? Because that was kind of your first foray into a lot of mobile experience and stuff, right?
Yeah, I worked with like a third-party development team when I was at USA Today, so I didn't have too much contact with them, except they made a lot of promises and didn't deliver. So that was slightly frustrating, but working with the team at Capital One actually proves to be kind of challenging at times because Capital One's like a really big company and not everyone is in the same office. So we have offices in San Francisco, I think one in Seattle, New York, Richmond, Plano, Texas, and obviously Northern Virginia. But yeah. So when I like worked on iOS, and then I like split web with the other designer. And then when we decided they were going to launch Android, he was like, "Do you want to lead design for Android?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." But we had just acquired this company called Monsoon in Oakland, and so we were using their Android developers. So like, we were always operating at a 3-hour time difference, you know. So like communicating with them, it was like I had core hours of like noon, till 5, and that was it. And that was the only time I had to like talk to them. I mean, obviously, I feel like they would ask questions after my work time, but even now, like a lot of my team is in San Francisco, and like they have to adjust for East Coast, and like we have to adjust for West Coast. So like I'm not always. I feel like I like to get to work early because I like to leave early, you know, kind of thing. But like my whole life's getting switched on its head, and I'm like staying later and like having meetings till 6 o'clock, which is, ugh, you know.
Is that a common thing? Because I know one of the designers I work with at the company I'm at, Proforma, she sets office hours, if you will, when you can come talk to her and ask open questions about maybe something she designed or a question we have or why it may not work when it gets to development. Is that a common thing you see or like your team does at Capital One or?
Yeah, I feel like we used to have office hours, but I haven't done them in a really long time. What about you? Do you have that?
I don't specifically. I know she has them, and I think one of our other designers have them, and I think it's worked really well because it's a time when the entire development team knows, hey, I can go and talk to her specifically, and no matter what question we have, we can ask. Because the problem I saw that was happening, and you can probably attest to this, is if you pass off your design to the development team, and we start bombarding you with questions, you end up breaking your flow to try and answer questions, and then you have to get back in your flow of, here was my thought process to design this out. So I think that's worked really well. I mean, I don't know, can you hop back into your flow immediately?
Yeah, I don't
like
really mind it. It's fine. To me, I'm always like, ask more questions, you know? I don't mind it at all. I was gonna ask you something and I forget. Oh, what are you working on right now?
So I work on an entire business management solution that has everything from order entry to credit card processing. So it's basically an all-in-one solution for the print and promotional owners that we have.
Cool.
So it's probably the largest and probably will be the largest application I ever work on. So the way I like to phrase this to people is, I'm like, all right, think of the biggest application you've ever worked on, and now multiply that by 5. It's basically about 6 projects all wrapped into one.
Wow.
That's releasing all at the same time.
When's
about
that
3
happening?
weeks.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I can't believe you're here.
Yeah, well, you know, this was on the docket long before.
Right.
So
So, you know, like even your deadlines for school are like seem wicked stressful. It's like deadlines for work are even more like, you're like, oh God, it has to be this Friday, you know?
it's one of those things, you obviously have worked on CreditWise and are now working on an internal tool for your analyst. I've worked on plenty of different apps where if you miss a deadline, it's affecting people's livelihoods or maybe the way they're going to use this groundbreaking feature. I know the stuff I'm working on, if we don't ship what we've promised, we have about 600 different owners that use our system, and they have a staff of people. And it's their livelihoods. It's how they make money. If we can't deliver, we're affecting that many people's businesses and more. And we're talking $500-600 million of revenue. So
No pressure.
It's
Right. No pressure.
it's always that big question of, oh, you know, can we meet the deadline? And as you go through, obviously, you try and pad yourself for the deadline, but you know, just like you have the surprise and delights, you also have the oh gotchas of things that come up in the project or something you may not have designed, something you may have not have thought of to develop.
Yeah, when we first launched the app, they call it like an MVP, like minimal viable product, you know,
Yeah.
which is like what's the tiniest thing you can do to get to market. And so we did that, but we also had a bunch of stability issues, like when we launched. And we had like the best review I've ever seen in my entire life. And this person wrote it and said, "This app crashes so much, I'm no longer insured by State Farm." I was like, this is amazing. You guys didn't laugh, do you know? Okay, laughter from the crowd, haha. Yeah, that was like the best review I've ever seen in my life. But I mean, people let you know about it. Do you do QA with your designers? Like you were talking about.
So we don't do necessarily a Q&A, like an open Q&A or anything. I mean, we do QA testing
Okay.
to go over everything, but we don't. It's not really necessarily. Our design team is 2 people right now, so it's a smaller session. So they're pretty much heads down because of how close we are to the deadline of getting everything out.
Okay. I used to do it a lot at USA Today. We would like anything a developer worked on, then we had people in between, like quality assurance.
Quality assurance.
They would actually look at our design, look at the build, and they were like the middleman, being like, "That's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. You have to fix that."
I mean, we have a lot of that, but
It's kind of cool.
it's funny that, have you ever had something that looked great in staging? So it had already gone through quality assurance and they gave it the okay. You push the button at whatever time, midnight on a Friday for go live, and you wake up Saturday morning and you're just like, oh my goodness, this isn't what we expected at all. Everything's breaking or crashing.
Yeah.
Have you had those experiences? 'Cause I know I
Yeah,
have.
I think we did in the beginning. Actually, one day, like the entire Capital One ecosystem like went down, which meant like no one could log in, which also meant like people couldn't pay their bill. And people had like a due date, I think, of that day, and like the next day, it wasn't back till the next day. Like I think it was out almost like 24 hours.
Yeah.
And so that like if people miss their payment, right, they get late fees. I mean, luckily as a company, but people were going like wild, like on social media and stuff like that's. I like it. I like watching the train wreck.
Yeah, well, I mean, at a certain point, there's only so much you can do. I know.
Yeah.
I worked on a healthcare application, so you obviously had to be HIPAA compliant and everything in a previous job. And I remember it was around Christmas time in December, and we had just pushed a new build out, and we thought everything was great. And somebody had wrote a development script to just drop everything in the database, and it wasn't caught. So we, over the Christmas break when everybody's out, we had all of our clients that these are hospitals depending on this information, and they
Yeah.
lost all their client information.
Oh.
And that was a fun one to watch unfold.
Wow.
So.
Technology is really cool. You know?
When it works, it's
Yeah,
really cool.
when it works, it's great, but when it doesn't, you're like, yep. And
Now,
then we get mad, We like get mad and we like freak out, but how can we? It's technology, and it
So
will fail
I know
us.
Zeppelin's an online tool, and it's a fairly new tool, right? The past 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
Do they have growing pains or stumbling issues? Does it ever go down as a service?
Yeah. Sometimes I can't get in there. Oh gosh, have you guys used InVision at all?
Oh yeah.
Dude, InVision is the worst, but it's like the easiest to use.
Yeah.
It's just always giving me issues, and like sometimes my screens aren't there, and I'm like going back and being like, what happened? And I just have to refresh it 6 times, and then I'm like, oh, it's right there, or it like won't replace when I've replaced one. It keeps bringing up the old one. And then like it's always like breaking my builds. So you can build like clickable prototypes in InVision. You just like put your screens in this app, and then you like get to draw boxes around it. So XD has it. There's a prototype mode. It's the same thing. It's just this online tool. Yeah, that thing drives me nuts. But it's the easiest.
Half the time it doesn't work though.
Yeah.
I know, but that's how at the previous company I was at. That's the flows we would get was just InVision docs, and you'd click it and you'd see the flow, and 90% of the time it'd make it into production, and then the design team would come back and say, hey, you missed 16 screens, and I'd say, well, InVision just failed me, or the screens weren't even there. But like I know one of the tools that's fairly common in the development industry to use is GitHub, which is just a code repository where we store our code. And now they're fairly stable, but back in the day when they were growing, there was always a lot of growing pains, and they had the unicorn picture and the 404, and it would always just go down. And the joke was always, it's like Twitter back in the day with the fail whale.
Yeah.
Well, if it goes down, I mean, there's our work. We're done for the day. Let's go, grab lunch or something because we can't do any work.
Shucks.
So bad. So what kind of tools do you use to like talk internally? Do you use like Slack or HipChat or
Oh, wow.
what's the other one?
We used to use
Microsoft Teams?
HipChat, and I really, really loved it, and then we got Slack. Now we have like 6 different ways to communicate. So there's Google, there's GChat, there's Slack, and there's Zoom.
Sounds like a lot.
So we need more, right? We need one more to balance it
Yeah, I
out.
think.
What do you guys use?
Now we just use Slack, and we use Zoom for video meetings. The previous place I was at, we had Zoom, Microsoft Teams, HitChat, Slack, WebEx, Skype.
Yeah, we had
And there was
Slack, too.
one more, yeah. There was
Yeah.
about 7 different tools to try and communicate. And depending on where you were in the company, like if you were on the biz dev side, you used a different tool than if you were on the development side. So you'd have to gain access to the different portal to be able to talk to somebody in the biz dev to figure out about like a requirement of why we need this offer higher than another offer or something. So that was always a big fun pet peeve of mine.
That's cool. What program are you guys in? Game. What? Yes, I remember you. Cool. So we have like a bunch of different people here. That's awesome.
I
What'd you say?
think
I'm
we're
sorry.
ready for questions, right?
Film. Awesome.
All right, why don't we take some questions from the audience?
I think one common thing though is like you consistently have to work with other people, and like that proves to be challenging, you know, sometimes because you're like even us, we're different, we're completely different human beings, and learning like how to work with other people is super super important.
And communicate clearly.
Yes, and you're not going to get it right the first time. I definitely didn't. I failed at it a lot over the past, you know, like years. I think it was only until a couple years ago that I was like, I took a workshop about communication styles, and I was like, oh, so that guy isn't just a jerk. He's just, that's how he communicates.
just communicates
Yeah. Which like helped me immensely. Yeah.
So you have, I'm Christian Snow with Entertainment Business.
Cool name.
I love it. How do you communicate with the team to establish a workflow where you're all understand what the roles are and day-to-day tasks that you need to do?
Do you want to start that one off?
Do you want to take it or you want me to take it?
I think you should start it.
So from the development side, we follow an agile Scrum methodology. So we follow these sprints. And part of this whole methodology is every morning we have what we call a Scrum meeting or a stand-up. And in that, we all kind of talk about priorities. So at the start of this sprint, we all commit to saying, there's 10 things that we want to complete in these 2 weeks. This is what we're going to do. And then every day, it's kind of a check-in to say, all right, Margaret's working on the design for screen 1, and Michael's working on the development for screen 2. This is where we're at. Christian doesn't have anything right now. He's going to work on assignment 3. And then you kind of talk through that, and every day there's a new checkpoint. So if Margaret finishes up on screen 1, she knows she can say, hey, you know, whatever it is the next day, hey, I'm going to take screen 4. And that's one way, at least from the development side, how we establish and split out those tasks and keep things forward. I have no clue from a design aspect how you break up how you're going to design things.
Let's see. So you're right about the stand-ups. I usually work very, very well in the morning. Like I will get to work and we have this room, it's a hanging basket room. You know, one of those like chairs you can sit in. So I like get to work, I take my laptop and I go in that room for 2.5 hours. And I basically get all of my work done in 2.5 hours for the rest of the day. And so like at our company, we have a lot of meetings and then we have like a lot of other meetings to talk about meetings, you know, kind of thing. So it's like, it's just a lot of time like spent communicating things. And right now, as we're building this internal tool, they're also trying to build a design system at the same time, which is kind of nuts, you know? It's like, you know, coming, and then like, there's people who like own the system, and then you're like making a new, like if I made a new way that like a title looked, you know, it's like I have to like talk to them about it, but I usually would rather ask for forgiveness than permission kind of person. I'm just like the type of person who likes to get shit done and get it out the door, and like we'll fix it later. But I guess like yeah, on an average day. So like I was saying, the problems come down and blah blah blah. You said something about communication, right? The team. It's like consistent communication. Like you always have to like say what you're doing, presenting your work, putting yourself out there. It never ends. It doesn't stop here. It's like life, in general.
I mean, from a development perspective, a really popular tool is Jira, and you just kind of get tasks assigned to you. I've also worked at another place where we just used GitHub's issue tracking to kind of assign out development tasks to work on during a project. So issues could come in from outside customers or from our internal teams, and they'd all just pile up, and they'd get a priority, and we would just grab them as the priority list came through and assign them out, and that's how we would work on them. I think we had another question over here.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Adora Wangu in the Digital Arts and Design program. First of all, I wanted to thank you both for speaking to us today. So I have a question about workflow, especially in regards to things that you're not too familiar with, kind of like design and like banking coming together. That's like a whole different world for you. And of course, you're working with deadlines. So how do you research efficiently and quickly so you actually have time to finish up the work that you're supposed to be doing?
How do I research effectively?
I'll start.
Okay.
I say probably about 90% of my job is being a master Googler.
I feel like I was.
And it really comes down to over my career, I've kind of honed out what exactly I'm trying to search for to get the right result. Or if I'm trying to see if somebody else has done a development technique elsewhere and how they did it to kind of compare. And over time, I've learned to adjust what my search queries are to pull that back. But I know there are still times where I just Google, how do I design a button? And hopefully I come back with a good result. Something as simple as that, there's always those cases. But over time, I've kind of just refined. And one of the things that I usually tell some developers is what makes a good developer from a bad developer is how well they can search in Google. And it really does come down to that, because you're probably not, at this day and age, you're probably not developing something unless you're in like virtual reality space that hasn't been done before on the internet. So it's just a matter of, can you do it more efficiently or find a case where they've done it before and then improve upon that?
Yeah, I'm always on Dribbble, and Pinterest has really good design inspiration. So if I'm like doing something new and I'm like, what can I do? This might be fun, and I get to like, I'm always on there and like taking inspiration from other people, because it's literally the fastest way to get something done. And it's okay to like imitate what other people are doing, like don't ever feel bad for doing that.
You do like a 50-day design challenge or something. What was
Yeah,
that
I tried the
design
100 days and I got through like 9. It's exhausting. Yeah, so like you can sign up for this 100-day UI challenge, and every day they'll send you a prompt. And one day it'll be like music player, or it was like a 404 screen, a bunch of stuff. So they'll give you this prompt, and it's up to you to make your own interpretation of it. But I always like am doing like design exercises on the side. I also, since I do UI UX, but my passion is still in print design, I have like a music poster series that I do, and I just listen to a song like 100 times and then make my own interpretation of that lyric into a poster, which has been like one of my favorite passion projects. Always keeping myself current. And it's because coming back here and seeing all of you, and I'm like, I can't let you be better than me. I have to be one step ahead of you.
Gotta stay relevant. Do we have another question?
Hello, my name's Terry Creamer, and I'm in entertainment business. My question is, how do you decide how to like prioritize responsibilities when you start a project?
I don't really make those decisions, actually. Other people make those decisions for me. It's interesting. It depends, I think, on the scale too. Like wherever you go and you work, the size of that place or the scale of the organization, like how big or how small they are, is going to determine that kind of thing for you. So for me, it comes from like a project person. It's either like a user says it, we put it into a thing, and then like the product manager will like, they make a list of priorities, and depending on like where the business is at and like what they want to do, or where their priorities are, that thing becomes like the most important. And I've had to like pivot. Like 1 week I'm working on this thing. The next week we're like, hey, we need to do this third party partnership. You need to make a thing, like ready, let's go. Like forget what you were just doing, like completely forget it. And then we move on to, and sometimes they're like, okay, that thing you're working on right now, forget about that. So we're gonna move on to this other thing. I don't make decisions, sorry. Sometimes, not all the time.
I think from my side, I've been lucky to come into projects that are already well established, and then I've also had the opportunity to start projects fresh. And starting a project fresh is really fun because we go towards what we kind of talked about earlier of the MVP, or your minimum viable product. What's the least amount of features that we can have in this thing to ship it and maybe start making money off of it? And then from there, the prioritization almost kind of falls into order of what are our customers asking for. That's probably the most, because they're the ones paying us. So that's going to be the most important feature that we then prioritize next on top of that and go there. Because at the end of the day, for the most part, I have the same experiences. There's probably somebody like a project manager that has priorities, and I've been at plenty of places of employment where the project manager says, this is the next most important thing. And usually what I do is I push back and I say, is that something that like our customers are asking for, or is that something that business is asking for somewhere in that flow? Because there have been plenty of times where I've worked on a feature, and let's say we spent 4 months on this feature. This was what was prioritized by this project manager. And we build some tracking into it to see how many of our actual customers are using this. And I've gotten a big fat goose egg of 0. So we spent 4 months of this prioritized thing, and it comes to find out not a single customer was asking for it. It was the one project manager that wanted it and had since left the company. So usually on projects, the prioritization comes in from what do our customers need or want, and then they kind of filter in that priority from there. Mm-hmm. I think we had another question somewhere. I saw a hand.
Hello, my name's Ayman Kamal. I'm in game design. And my question is about when you guys first started out in your careers, how was the experience getting up to speed with all the developers and being around a bunch of professionals?
That's a good question. I didn't even know. I started in like print, and we just like sent stuff out, and then I started at USA Today, and like the whole team is in Northern Virginia, so the developers sat like right behind me, and so every day we were like talking. Like I had an amazing bond and an amazing relationship, and so like I don't think I really knew like what they did. But they like taught me along the way. It was a bit different on my other project on CreditWise because everyone sat in like different places, and it was a bit more challenging. So I had to like really go out of my way to make that relationship good.
I'd say for me, it was kind of very early in my career, just kind of thrown into the fire. I came in working at a digital design agency, doing a lot of work for OSI brands, which was like Outback and stuff. And they would come to us on a Monday morning and say, hey, we need to ship this campaign by Monday evening. So it was a lot of work and sitting right next to designers, designing out what we were going to design out, and then building it, and spending late nights till 6, 7 at night to make sure we shipped it for them. So I got very immersed very quickly, thrown in. And that's still, even to this day, I'd say completely immerse yourself, throw yourself in the fire, kind of jump off the deep end of the diving board. Because even though you'll feel like you're drowning, you're going to be learning a lot, and you're going to propel yourself ahead of somebody else who takes a more conservative route. And the thing you always have to remember is there's always probably going to be somebody smarter than you, or somebody that likes to use more technical jargon than you. There's plenty of times from a development perspective where I'll be talking to a developer and they just like to use technical jargon out the wazoo, even though we know we're talking about the same things. But one way you can really master something and really truly understand it is if you can dumb it down to teach your child or to teach your grandmother, hey, this is a design technique, or this is how we do something in development. That's when you really know how you master it. I've found the people that like to use the technical jargon and try and sound all fancy are compensating for their lack of actual knowledge around whatever the subject matter is.
I was going to say that was an amazing place to end.
Yeah, let's give let's give our panelists a wonderful round of applause.
Thanks for coming.
What a great panel. Thank you guys so much for coming out and joining us today. What a great panel with Margaret and Michael. We are continuing on with the awesome Hall of Fame events, so we look forward to seeing you in the next set of panels. Thank you so much.